Being a manager today is hard. Thankfully for us, there are folks out there who are doing the research to figure out exactly what capabilities are required to be an excellent leader. Turns out there are 9 of them, and today's guests are going to unpack them for us so that we can all become better managers. Today, I am joined by 2 fabulous guests, Margaret and Jeffrey Hall. Margaret is the founder of Wellcoaches Corporation, co-founder of the Institute of Coaching, and a faculty member with the Harvard Medical School Office of Global Education. She has over 25 years of C-suite roles and experience coaching C-suite executives by blending leadership, coaching, and science. Jeffrey is an executive director and coach with the Institute of Coaching and founder of Leadership Inc. He brings over 30 years of translating science into leadership as a consultant, psychologist, and teacher at New York University and Harvard Medical School. Together, Margaret and Jeffrey co-authored the new book, The Science of Leadership: 9 Ways to Expand Your Impact. Now, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I share new episodes and other tips for managers every week. Now, here's the conversation. Thank you both so much for joining me today. I'm super excited to talk about some of the research that you've gathered and the different leadership traits and capabilities that are so important for all of us who are doing our best day in and day out to lead a team. And it just sometimes feels like harder than ever. So thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be here with you, Mamie.
Thank you for having us.
What is the state of managers today? You were just mentioning some research, Margaret. Maybe you can kind of fill us in. I mean, we all have our lived experience, but what's happening kind of societally and across the globe when it comes to being a manager?
So, and maybe we can share this with your listeners, but Gallup just published its 2025 analysis. It's actually 2024 data, but since the pandemic, thriving of managers has gone down. Fewer thrive. And it's been on a downward trajectory for a while. There was a big conversation about how people are not feeling good about AI, the state of the world we don't need to get into. So the external world is certainly affecting managers, but thriving is down and engagement is down. Like globally, it's like 20% are enjoying their work, which is just a colossal waste of human potential and creativity.
If you add on to that, the research that Google did, I don't remember exactly when, but maybe 4 years ago, they put out research on what makes engagement likely to happen in a positive direction. And it was almost all focused on their boss. In other words, the leader sets the tone. The leader is the role model. If things are going to move in a positive trajectory, it's very likely going to be directly connected with the manager.
So we basically got ourselves in quite a pickle then, because managers are not feeling good about their jobs, which just has that trickle effect to the rest of their team members in the organization who are relying on the manager or where the manager is playing that outsized role. This is a problem. All right, so what do we do about it?
The good news, Mamie, is that people have a lot more resources. I mean, that's why we're coaches. People have a lot more resources than they realize. And, we tend to let the environment come in, and it's not necessarily a positive environment. And we don't always realize that we can actually bring out our own positive resources. And tons of adversity really call us to do that. And, you mentioned 2 things that emerge from the science. One is positive psychology, which has been around for 20 years, but it's only in the last 10 years it's been applied to work. Like a lot of research starts with life and just general application. And then eventually we realize, well, let's bring it to work too, because if it works for human thriving when we're not working, it's probably going to work when we're working. Yeah. So positive psychology has a pretty strong framework. We talk about psychological capital and as a way of framing a bunch of resources that people need to intentionally draw out. And it takes some regulation, like you have to make an effort to do it, but it is in your own power. You can drive yourself to a positive state.
Your question is getting at exactly why we wrote our book. What we recognized as coaches and as researchers is that there are a lot of resources available. There's been a lot of study done about what makes a good manager, what makes an effective leader. Unfortunately, the vast majority of that gets locked up in the libraries, academic journals, and very few people that are actually doing the job actually have time. They might have the interest, they might have the inclination, but to have the time to actually sift through the academic research, to read it, to find it useful, to put it into practice. I mean, that's just way beyond what most managers can find their way to doing. And that's what we really wanted to accomplish with this book, which was to take the research and winnow it down, because there's a lot over many, many years, but to winnow it down into focus areas and then share with our coaching experience how that can be applied to the real world so that it becomes something that's actually useful for managers in their day-to-day world, but it is based on science. It is based on research. So it does become an additional resource for obviously very overstressed and overworked leaders at this time.
So why don't you tell us the name of your book, and then what are those different categories and the different traits that you kind of unearthed from all of that research?
The book is titled The Science of Leadership: 9 Ways to Upgrade Your Impact. I mean, it's a lot of work to read hundreds and hundreds of papers across 50 plus topics. There's a lot in the last 50 years. And so to read all that and then try to organize it first into buckets, but also into levels of complexity. You know, that's what we were able to do based on what we'd already done for coaching. So that's that. So there's 3 levels of complexity. There's managing yourself, managing others, and then managing the system. And then within each 3, the first one, managing yourself, is conscious, which is awareness of yourself, seeing clearly, you know, seeing through your emotions, sifting which emotions to act on, which ones not to. Then the second is authenticity, which is caring, which is values, heart. I care about this and you care about that. And together we care about something bigger. So that's the heart. And then the agility is the flexibility, which is the ability to dance around, to be able to move across, you know, whether it's being curious, whether it's being resilient, whether it's being dealing with conflicts, you know, we've got to be able to. So those are the self. And then the other starts with relationships, which of course, we know a lot about how fundamental relationships are. But it's more than just connections. It's actually building relationships where there's deep empathy and there's forgiveness and there's, you know, all the things that make good relationships. And then the positivity, which is strengthening other people, helping them get stronger and more able to deal with the demands. And then compassion, which is the resonance with an understanding in a kind of strategic way of all the moving parts and bringing those together in this beautiful way. So that's the other. And then the system is sharing. So you got all these skills, but now how do you bring them all to everybody and not just like tell everybody what to do, actually disseminate all that, right? And then servant leadership, which is, you know, serving the larger good stakeholders. And then the biggie is transformational leadership, because that's how you get yourself out of the muck into something better. So that's the setup. And that basically allowed us to boil down all the science into, I mean, it's still a lot, but it's all there actually. You know, all the pieces could fit into that framework, which is what makes it feel whole and complete.
Yeah, how wonderful it would be if we could all just embody those 9 characteristics right out of the bat. That would just be so lovely. It is a lifelong journey of self-improvement. But I want to pull out 2 of them. So, and we chatted about these a little bit earlier before we started, but the first is actually flexibility, because it seems to me almost like that is a core of what it means to be a manager, to be able to flex across your different team members, to be able to flex from big picture to the details, to be able to flex from doing my own work with my own head down to addressing the system that I'm responsible for, right? It is constantly even more so than an individual contributor would ever experience. And I don't think we talk about that enough, of the skill of flexibility. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about the science behind that, and then how do we assess ourselves and develop ourselves if we want to become more flexible?
It's just incredibly relevant to the evolution that led to this book, really, because my last book was called Flex, The Art and Science of Leadership in a Changing World, which came out maybe 4 years ago, just around the time of the pandemic. Good timing for flexibility. And when I started doing research on the next book, you know, what was going to come after the leadership agility focus of my last book, that's when Margaret and I had conversations with the publisher about looking at the broader research. So agility actually was one of the core principles. We had some fun actually in the early planning stages of this book as to where agility would fit, because we both agreed. I, in particular, was focused on it because it was an extension of my last book. But Margaret agreed that a lot of the research, especially coming out of software development, where agile approaches have really taken off, the research, unfortunately, around leadership, and Margaret can speak to this, hasn't really caught up yet with software development, but a lot of it is still absolutely applicable, because what makes a leader flexible is that ability to move quickly through iterations, an iterative cycle of reflection, action, learning, starting over, seeing where you worked, seeing what didn't work. So, the model that they use in software development for agility is absolutely applicable. It hasn't been heavily researched yet. I think that's currently underway, but it is a source that we used in terms of developing the principles in the agility section of the book. And the only thing I would add is that, in my research that I conducted for the earlier book, one of the core principles of flexibility that I discovered with many other coaches in our work with managers was that people tended to fall into kind of buckets. They tended to either fall into what I would call the heroic sort of directive style, which is often known as an alpha style leader, or they would be really collaborative and consensus building, which is the beta style leader. And both of them are appropriate depending upon the context. So there's an assessment in my earlier book around discovering for yourself as a manager, are you more of a alpha type or are you more of a beta type? Then you go through the different aspects of what it means to manage people in different contexts and determine how to build flexibility, because sometimes when you want, for example, creativity and innovation, being directive, being an alpha isn't going to get you very far. Sitting people down and saying, be creative. I want some new ideas. Like, yeah, this doesn't usually work like that, right? So depending upon what you want to get with your folks and what your vision and your values and what you're trying to manifest, it may make more sense to be flexible, authoritative in one situation and collaborative and sort of stepping back and being more of a servant leader in other situations. So I'm really glad that you picked agility as for something for us to talk about, because flexible leadership is key in today's world. I mean, we're all sort of reeling from all the changes that are happening in the ecosystems, whether it's just in organization or broader. So learning how to bounce back, to be resilient, to stay curious, to be a learner, really, really key. Margaret can probably add to that around the research part.
The idea about agility is a big one. It's central, as we've been saying. What most people don't realize is that there's like a textbook amount of work on mental agility, cognitive agility. It's related to intelligence too. So think about there's two dimensions. This is really worth, because the mental agility, is the work, right? So there's the two dimensions are first specificity. So in an organizational structure, there's the operational person, the implementer, and then there's the strategist. And usually people are good at better at one or than the other. Sometimes they're equal, but that's, that amount of integration of those two different things, which is standing back to see the pattern and getting the work done. They're very different brain. There are different regions of the brain that are active. The best managers are able to go down into the detail and be with it and understand it and remember it and spit and hold on to it. Their memories can hang on to it, but then they can pull themselves back when you're getting too in the weeds, to, okay, what's happening to us right now? Are we getting stuck? Do we have enough variety of opinion? You know what I mean? So that's one dimension that really makes a difference at work. And then the other one is high to low control. So the low control is emoting, brainstorming, just let it all hang out. No regulation. Your thinking brain is just like It's in the back. It's not. You're just like kids, children. We all have it. We kind of forget about it. But so that creative, like letting flow state, letting go of control, letting yourself just like be in the moment, in the flow, like in the river, just moving with it. Okay. So that's the lower end of control. Mind wandering, which is a beautiful brain state. Amazing. We've lost it because every moment we've got a device. We don't actually have moments where we're bored and we let our minds wander. And we're paying a price for that because the brain needs to wander without any direction, right? Your imagination, all that. And then the high control is the, threading the needle, reading a spreadsheet, analyzing your P&L, why did we lose this money this month? Why is this going down? Getting into precision. So that creates a big map of moving around. And so you're moving around your brain, literally from here to back to down. And that exercise for the brain, it's a lot of exercise. And the more of your brain you use, the more creative and productive you are. But also you get tired because you're exercise, right? Like physical agility. So then you've got to get enough sleep. You've got to eat well and keep your blood sugar stable, not the chocolate bar, not the Coca-Cola, right? And then you have to exercise to keep the frenzy, the stress, the noise down. So yeah, so the agile mind is a really beautiful thing, and it needs to be celebrated and appreciated more. And our brains are so precious, and using it well is just a gift.
As you say, it is a workout to be able to shift gears, especially quickly when you're going from a meeting that's like in the weeds on a detailed project plan to your next meeting, which is with your boss. And you're now like looking at the big picture goals and things like that. And then that's a tall order for us. So for those of us who obviously have a preference for one side or the other, are there things that we can do to help ourselves either stretch more comfortably into a different mode or move more quickly from one zone of our brain to the other zone of the brain so that we can just be more optimized and be more flexible and agile in those ways?
The most important thing is to build in the pauses and really reboot, turning off your computer and turning it back on again. Because you're running in one way and you have to actually pull your mind back into the middle. And so you need to either hit the pause button, which is to take a breath, or you need to reboot, which is to get out of your chair and go do something. So, and then be intentional. Okay, that was a weeds conversation. And now I need to be big picture, sitting back, strategic. So my intention is to do something different. And the other thing I want to say is the purpose of the book is to get people to realize there are all these different beautiful ways to use your mind and your being. And the more of them you use, the better it is. And so we're saying it's worth it. There's lots of people saying, just build on your strengths, forget your weaknesses. We're here to say that, yes, to a point, but you're never going to be as good at one area than another, but it will broaden your repertoire and you will be more, more fulfilled, more effective, but you have to create those pauses in order to make the shifts.
Yeah, I can add to that a real life situation that I think represents what everything that Margaret is talking about. And it's also, at least a version of it is included in the conscious leadership chapter of the book, because the very first level in our 9-step journey toward transformational leadership or management is consciousness, becoming aware and objective of yourself. And when we were thinking about a case study that we wanted to look at, picking real life coaching situations that we've worked through, I remembered working with someone who was extremely well-intentioned, a very good human being overall, and very well liked by his colleagues. But he had a tendency to do everything you're describing, which is to constantly move from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And the challenge was that if he had a negative experience that was triggering in one meeting, he would then immediately go into another one or be on the phone texting or whatever. So there was no space for him to transform or to integrate the experience and to let it go if it was painful, or to keep it alive if it was joyful. In other words, he was just constantly, wasn't paying attention. So one thing that we did as a practice in his coaching was add what I call buffer zones. And to this day, having seen how it worked for him, I pretty much recommend it to all my clients, including myself, which is to make sure that you include little spaces of time between activities. And it can be, in his case, it was 5 minutes, get up, walk around, even go outdoors, fresh air. Physical activity shifts your brain, shifts your energy, and it made a huge difference for him. But you don't always even have that. So just to step back and, as Margaret said, to pause, to breathe, to get centered, and to be intentional about what's next. It sounds like a small thing, but I mean, there is a lot of really good research now on how becoming mindful, as simple as it sounds, can really make a difference. So buffer zones 1 minute, buffer zone 5 minutes, whatever you can add to your portfolio as a manager, I would highly recommend, because it gives you that freedom to be agile, actually. And also to reflect on what is my emotional state in this moment. What is really triggering me or upsetting me? And likewise, to Margaret's point about strengths, as coaches, one of the things we're always reminding our clients, our leaders that we work with, is when things work, pay attention to that too. Celebrate, right? People are so quick to go accomplish that goal, on to the next one. They don't take time to say, wow, look what we accomplished. Let's raise a glass of coffee, wine, whatever, let's take a minute to savor. And that links to our chapter on positive psychology, positive leadership, which is savoring, is also something that gets dropped out in our heavy duty busyness world. So buffer zones and savoring, I would add to what Margaret was saying.
I love this so much because it's something that we can all do, like literally starting as soon as you listen to the show, right? Like you can, before you go into your next moment, next meeting, next sit down with your desktop, whatever, just take that moment and breathe and think about, how am I feeling in this moment? What is my intention? What kind of brain space do I need to be in for this next activity? Like, it's so easy. And I actually would say, apply it with your team. How fun would it be to sit down for your meeting? And the first thing you do together is just take a breath and say, what kind of brain space do we need to be in right now? And let's all intentionally shift into that way. Like, that would be, I can imagine, would be a game changer in terms of what you get out of a brainstorm or what you get out of a decision-making meeting. So I'm loving this so much. All right. And I want to talk a little bit more about the positivity before we totally run out of time here. So this feels like another one of those things, as you said, we kind of like are constantly running past it. And, we don't do it. We don't give enough praise. We don't give enough appreciation. We don't celebrate milestones. We don't, acknowledge accomplishments because we're always chasing the next thing, right? So what does the research say about positivity?
Positive psychology is a vast field now too. So we, distilling that down into a few ideas. But what I want to start with, because I was talking about the brain before, is to do that again, which is to talk about the nervous system. And, everybody probably knows the nervous system has two modes: the sympathetic, which is the active stress mode, which is good until there's too much of it. And then the parasympathetic, which is actually the normal state. It's actually, if you take away the stress, the normal state is relax. Your entire system is healing and recovering. And so the parasympathetic nervous system comes online where it's revealed in moments of feeling good. And that's everything, there's various levels. There's feeling good, pleasure. I just enjoyed that conversation. I savored that accomplishment. To meaning, that was that was fulfilling for me, that I did that. I helped somebody. I moved the ball forward. And then there's, wisdom. Oh boy, I really see perspective. And then the fourth category is growth. Oh, I'm better than I was before. So there's lots of sources of positivity, and they're very important to balance the stress. One of the reasons coaching exists, professional coaching, I mean sports coaching, is because we've learned, actually our colleague Richard Boyatzis has shown with MRI machines, that if you ask people, imagine your future ideal self, your best self, or when were things going well, they relax, and they're more creative, they're more resourceful, They feel more agency. They feel just good all around, And when you say, okay, what's your problem? And what's your weakness? And what's the gap you want to close right now? Which is, this, they lose all that. So you have to, like, the pause is intentional and doable. This is the same thing as pulling myself out of the overdrive in the stress mode and coming back. And in a way, the pause is the same thing, right? You're bringing yourself back to a center place where the stress response settles down. So that means that you want to get a certain dose of positivity in every interaction, preferably right at the beginning. What went well? What are you enjoying? I noticed that was good. Like, how do you get people to get to the place where they are feeling better and then they're more ready to deal with it? Now, if there's like bad news, like they just got a cancer diagnosis or something like that, you can't do, then you're doing the human connection thing to make them feel better and to relax. But the positivity makes us relaxed and perform better. And we think that it's the demand and push, but in fact, you need the balance. So I guess the message here is the balance. If pausing was the message around the agility, the message around positivity is to make sure you have a balance, a good balance, like more good than negative. And you have to intentionally go out because it's around us, right? Our world is beautiful. I mean, it really is. It's truly amazing, this world. You just have to go look a little bit to find the goodness.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we have to start to wrap up. So can you each quickly share with us a great manager that you worked for and what made this person such a fabulous boss?
I don't know where he is, but if he ever listens to this, his name is Darren Oliver. When I was very, very young and early in my career. And it's the good news and the bad news, because the good news is he was an extraordinary leader. And I was the assistant director of HR at a company that I will not name. But Darren probably would be happy to hear that I'm sharing his name because he was one of my mentors. I say the good news and bad news is because I was really right out of college and I thought all leaders were like that. It was only later that I discovered that he was actually a pretty rare bird. So in any case, thank you to Darren. And I can remember one of the things that he did regularly that was really powerful. This was, back in the day when we all went into the office every day. So it's not absolutely applicable, though I think you can do it on Zoom with no problem. And that is that he would literally start the day with the HR team in this big company we work for by having what he called a coffee roundup every morning. And he would have us all come into his office. There were like 6 of us, and we would sit for literally just 15 minutes, and he would just check in. How are you? What's going to make this day great? What are we going to do today? What are we going to accomplish? What did we do yesterday that was worthwhile? And so as a way of starting, it wasn't every week, it was every day. And it was such a great habit, to start off the day with. And if people were feeling down, then we would practice empathy. I mean, I really got to visually watch someone show empathy, show compassion, be a good listener. No wonder I became a coach later on. So thank you to Darren. I wish many of the people that I worked for after him were more like that, but hey, it was a really great start.
My story is in my actually both of us are giving you early stories. So I was in my mid-20s. I'm a Canadian. I was just finishing my MBA at London Business School, and I was recruited by Imperial Chemical Industries. And the man is tall, very masculine Englishman, recruited me, Rob Margets. I had lunch with him in London a few years back to say thank you, like 31 years later. And he wasn't my direct boss. He was the head of the unit. But, for I didn't have a good experience at London Business School with the men. My Canadian business school was fine, but the men, I was completely patronized. I was not used to this at all. I had not experienced it. It was like I'd gone back 40 years. And I was really kind of, like I'd lost 20 points of IQ. I was, it's just like the men look at you and they just don't see you. He hired me in a managerial role with a really strong salary in a great opportunity in the north of England. And he did not see me. I mean, I didn't see me as a woman. He saw me as a human being with great potential. Actually, it's going to bring tears to my eyes because that didn't happen to me the rest of my career either. I don't think it was the way I was presenting. I think it was that the reaction of some men was to immediately put me into a, you're a doll, not a leader, right? I mean, that's when I was growing up, girls were dolls. That's how I saw it, That is, I think there's more people like that today. Even women don't see women for what they are and what they can do. So I think seeing through the surface stuff, the gender, and seeing the real you, that is actually in the book, that's seeing clearly.
We didn't talk about this. So we both chose early career leader mentors that we had. And I think there's a underlying theme there, which is the positivity that we both have in our lives and our belief, even though I've had a few toxic leaders since that time, the belief that really good leadership is possible because I've seen it and I try to be it. And I know Margaret does the same. So we try to be realistic around what we're living in right now, but we're bringing this book out for a reason, that we do believe that it's possible to be a good manager.
Well, I think this is the perfect place for us to wrap up. So thank you both so much for joining me today. Really a pleasure to learn and really understand the science behind these practices that seem like a good idea on their surface, but really are incredibly powerful.
Well, thank you for having us. Pleasure.